This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
I actually went to Mozambique when it was in the middle of a war, and we wandered around in the middle of it. Was a very terrifying time because it was in the middle of a 10-year war and people were living in the most devastating circumstances. So it changed my life because it introduced me to a world that I was oblivious to. And I was exposed to literally people who had been living in the bush for 3 or 4 months with nothing, and they were wrapped in bark.
I'm Georgia, and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that finds the good in the midst of the bad. Each episode, we meet someone who's had a bit of a hard time but has found hope and healing along the way. And hopefully they inspire you to embrace the good in your world too. Episode 27, Penny Mulvey. Penny Mulvey is the definition of a strong female role model. She's spent her career reporting on some of the toughest news. She's travelled to war zones, natural disasters, and was on radio in the wake of the September 11 attacks. She's a strong Christian who knows a thing or two about finding hope in the midst of tough times. And I'm so excited to have her on the podcast today. Let's meet her. Penny Mulvey, it is a pleasure having you on Finding Hope this morning. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, look, I'm so excited to be here, Georgia, and anything called Finding Hope will have me in it like a flash, because hope to me is my purpose, really, to remind people of the importance of hope.
Oh, fantastic. Well, off the back of that wonderful statement, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who is Penny Mulvey?
I don't know. Well, I would have some grey hairs probably somewhere hidden under my colour. So I'm not a spring chicken, I suppose one might say. I've been around the block a little bit, and it's a bit hard to know where to start that question, Georgia.
How did you come to know Jesus?
Oh, okay. That's going way back. I actually think I've known Jesus my whole life. I don't have I used to feel like I was a bit of a failure because I didn't have a great testimony story that I could get up and talk about. But I have a memory as a very young child, probably about 5. I was born in Mudgee in country New South Wales, and I have a memory of there being an enormous tent in our town, and there was a cartoonist there, and I learnt to sing a song that nobody has ever heard of called Behold I Stand, which comes out of Revelation. Behold I stand at the door and knock. Anyway, and I know all the lyrics of that song. It's very short. But I think at that point Jesus came into my heart, and I was sent to Sunday school by my parents, who, just because that was the thing you did, I'm talking the 1960s, and with my coin wrapped in its little handkerchief to put in the offering bowl. But as far as I know, I have confidence that God has been in my life always.
I love that. That's awesome. Have you always wanted to be in media? Because I know you've had a long media career. Has that always been a dream of yours, or what did you, kind of dream of growing up?
Well, apart from when I was about 6 or 7, I wanted to be Julie Andrews II, except I wanted to have long blonde hair. And I have never had long hair in my entire life. But apart from that, sometime in my teenage years, I wanted to work in radio. Now, I have no idea. I come out of a medical family. My father was a doctor. My grandfather, who I never knew, was a doctor. My aunt was a doctor. My mother was a physiotherapist. My sister became a physiotherapist. Don't ask me anything about medicine. I can't even remember the name of whatever medication I might need to take. So, my knowledge is zero. But I did want to work in radio. And I remember my father was a little bit anxious about that because I was a very innocent young thing. And he was concerned that, I might find myself in harm in this kind of, places of dens of iniquity of radio stations, which of course they weren't at all. But anyway, I did a comms degree out of Macquarie Uni, and within 6 weeks of that, I was offered a job at 2CA in Canberra. So I moved to Canberra. And then a few months after that, I was offered a job at the first FM station in Australia, Eon FM, and I moved to Melbourne. And I've lived here ever since.
But those first jobs weren't easy to come by. It wasn't a matter of applying with a CV and a cover letter. Penny had to put herself out there.
Straight out of uni, I door knocked. It was in the days when you actually could go and turn up rather than having to do online applications where no one can even see you. I mean, talk about never having a chance to actually be in front of someone and they can see what a kind of person you are. And as a 17-year-old, I suspect I was, just this long leg. I'm 5'10", so you're 178 centimetres. So I'm this sort of tall, leggy thing, and I would have been very much then just full of enthusiasm and naivety about the world and desperate to work in radio. And I spent some time at Anglican Media and I turned up at various radio stations looking for a job. And 2CH, there was a man by the name of Roger Pettit who headed up the community services, and he took pity on me. And I managed to have a job there just about every university holiday and worked across the various parts of radio. I did marketing. I handed out red carnations that had lucky numbers on them at various spots around the harbour when people jumped off the ferries. And I worked in the records library, which I hated. I worked in all the various things. I realised I know nothing much about music, and of course so much of radio is music. So in the end I thought, the place I really would like to be is in the newsroom. I think that's the thing that interested me the most. And then when I was doing my communications degree, I got to do 2 weeks work experience at 2WS. And so I started off at 4:30 in the morning, and I turned up, and the news director then, Greg, someone said to me, okay, here, I want you to ring this man, Robert James Lee Hawke, who of course then became later the Prime Minister. That stage he was the head of the ACTU, and I rang him at 5 in the morning. This is me as a 17, well, I suppose I was 19 then. And he was very grumpy because he was known for having a few too many drinks. He was obviously a little bit hungover, and he told me grumpily to call him back at 7, which I did. So that was my introduction to radio news.
Oh my goodness. How horrifying. Radio, media in general, historically a bit of a boys' club. How were you able to be taken seriously? You started in the media at such a young age as well. You weren't just, a woman, you were a very young woman.
Well, I suppose my first job in Canberra was actually I had a woman boss, and it was the two of us really initially doing the news. And she was a tough woman, really tough. And I learnt the hard way. So I remember on a Sunday night when they had a Sunday night news bulletin when you hadn't really had any news most of the day. And I was in preparing that, and I turned on the wrong switch, or I turned on the wrong switch first. So I turned on the microphone in the studio, which meant that the guy in the DJ couldn't actually talk to me and communicate to me that he hadn't actually switched over to the newsroom. The news jingle came on and I started talking, and I was speaking to dead air. So I was taken off news reading for a month. So I learnt things the hard way, which is a good thing. You kind of toughen up. I learnt how to write radio copy pretty quickly. I still write radio copy. I write in the present tense. I write short sentences. I write in language that people understand, So I learnt some really good lessons then. And so I started there. And I suppose when I went to Eon, funnily enough, that was a bit more of a boys' club. And my news director always, and I don't think he realised what he was saying, but he would cut out, that was in the days of page 3 girls in bikinis, and he would always cut out the page 3 girl and stick her up on the wall in the newsroom, and then he'd put the next one up, and he had a favourite who was Charlie. And there were plenty of kind of jokes. And over the years, I've heard some pretty offensive jokes from people. So yeah, that there was definitely that. And you would get the softer stories when I was at 10, and certainly people would try and push you around a bit. But you kind of accepted that was what it was. And I realise how the world is so different now. And I actually had a job after my first child was born at the ABC as a casual. It turned out to be actually cost me more to go and have that casual job by the time I paid for, childcare and everything than to work there. But I couldn't believe the difference because there was no sexist jokes. It was an entirely different environment, and it's hard to explain except that it wasn't there. And it was strikingly different for that reason. And I think probably because there were a lot more women working there and it was a much more diverse workplace even back then.
But it wasn't just sexism that Penny faced. She had other barriers too. After she had a child, no company was willing to take her back part-time. And full-time was too much when she was juggling new motherhood. She was stuck. Until she wasn't.
God opened other doors. So sometime, probably when he was about 2 or 3, I got a phone call from World Vision, totally out of the blue, who, because they were looking for someone to help them access secular media in a more, to kind of get an in there. And someone had given them my name, which was amazing. And I got another phone call asking if I had a passport. And I said yes. I actually had one for when I was at Channel 10 in case they might send me somewhere, and they never did. So I actually went to Mozambique when it was in the middle of a war with the CEO of World Vision at the time and Neil Finn, the musician from Crowded House, and a film crew. And we wandered around in the middle of it was a very terrifying time because it was in the middle of a 10-year war and people were living in the most devastating circumstances. So it changed my life because it introduced me to a world that I was oblivious to, and I was exposed to literally people who had been living in the bush for 3 or 4 months with nothing, and they were wrapped in bark and they had no belongings and they were skin and bone, they were malnourished. There was a child sitting on this woman's knee. She had her family around her. They were all literally skin and bone, but this child looked like about a 6-month-old but was sitting there and could obviously talk and was probably 2. After that, they sent me to Romania to look at the story around the throwaway children that you wouldn't have any memory of, but it was orphans who were found in orphanages living in the most hideous, they actually weren't always orphans, hideous conditions, and that was quite a shattering trip. I went to Bangladesh literally 5 or 6 days after one of the world's worst natural disasters that went through through the Bay of Bengal, and maybe up to 1 million people perished, but they don't have the precise numbers. That was devastating. It's hard to even find words to describe that trip. When you go and see a world that is so different to your own, it does leave a significant mark. You can't help but be changed when you meet people who have literally lost all their family members.
Penny was a different person when she returned from those trips, and they set her life on a trajectory of working in Christian media and non-profits, which she still works in today. But it wasn't easy to adjust after coming home. She was changed forever, but life had seemingly gone on around her just the same.
I suppose those parts were kind of 2 parts of my life. The first part with World Vision, I only had 1 child. The second part with Anglecord, I had 3. And then they were also going to private schools. And to kind of have your kids in private school and then be going to this was tearing me apart a bit because I thought, how am I doing this? And then I found people, I'd come back quite traumatised sometimes or, certainly burdened, and life had just gone on with other people and I didn't know quite how to deal with that, especially the Bangladesh trip. I can remember because I was literally flown in and flown out again really quickly, and then I was rushed up to a current affair in Sydney, so I was put on a plane to go there, and literally as I just come back, my husband gave me a suit, met me at the airport, said, "You're on a plane to Sydney. Your mother's picking you up. We've organised it. You're being interviewed." And I went, "Oh, okay." I can remember going down an escalator with my son, they'd just picked me up, and he was 4 at that stage, and I brought him the one thing you learn when you've got children and you travel is you have to buy them a present. So I'd bought him something at the airport, which is no good getting them something that comes from the country because really they just want a toy. So that's a word to all parents. Don't ever think you want to give your child some special, unique thing from somewhere. They just want something in a box from the airport shop. So he's opening this up and he looks up at me and says, "Mummy, do you love me?" I said, "Yes, I love you." "Do you really love me?" "Yes, I really love you." "Then you would have bought me 2 presents instead of 1. Now, he's never lived that down because I've just come from people who've lost everything, interviewed people who literally have lost their families, their homes, their jobs. These are men, that's all they've got. And he's not to know that, but I could have throttled him at that moment in time. Anyway, so it's really difficult, and I found that I wasn't coping very well as time went on. My husband, I remember, said at one stage, "You've lost your sense of humour." I was somewhere and someone kind of tried to make a joke about what I was doing, and I didn't cope well. Because people really don't care. Although I shouldn't say that. Some of the parents at school, one of the mums put on an event to raise money for what I was doing and invited a whole lot of other people to a morning tea and got me to talk about it, and which was really lovely. So people, it's that kind of contradiction, and it's really hard for us. We can't take on the whole world. Look at us, what we're trying to deal with now. We've had all the terrible floods. We've had, the stuff going on in Ukraine. It's easier almost to park it, hand it over to God and park it, than try and deal with it all because we can't really do anything. So we feel helpless, or we just don't care. And I think there are some who just, they either got too much going on in their own lives or they really don't want to know about what's going on in other people's lives and in the rest of the world. And I think we are much richer for knowing, and we do have a sense of the importance of at least praying and being aware of the world in which we live. Because if we don't, we will just continue to become more and more entitled and more privileged and just be and think that this is the way the world should be, but we know it's not.
It's definitely not. And it's so important to stay informed to what's happening around us. But what happens at the other end of the pendulum, when we get too invested in the news, which is something that's happened to a lot of us in the last 2 years?
For those listening who may be working in the media or not able to turn off the news for any number of reasons, what encouragement would you give to them to try and take care of themselves, or ways to kind of cope with this constant bombardment of terrible news?
I think it's really hard if you are literally working full-time in the media. Whether it's you give yourself a news-free day on a day that you have off, but the problem is you turn up at the office the next day and if something big's happened and you missed it, you're in trouble. I actually feel sorry for people who read the news now, but then I watch them, particularly on the television, and sometimes you feel like they've got no sense of what they're actually reading. 5 people died today, blah, 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 blah. One daughter was, and there's no emotion around that, and yet you're telling something that is so full of gravitas. It's so significant and hard, and yet there's no contrast in the voice tone. And maybe that is a coping mechanism, and you can't, but it doesn't create any, you use your voice. In radio, it's all about your voice. That's all a person hears. And if you don't differentiate anything between one story and the next, so therefore a protest in the streets of Sydney is the same importance as someone who loves dogs, then we're not giving the right emphasis to things that we should, I think. But it's hard if you're the newsreader to do that every hour, because every hour you are bringing news that is hard. It's significant. I think you'll find that you have to toughen up. You can't take it all on. So is the way that you not take it on is almost, do you then create a separation, or are you so used to it that it's like water off a duck's back? The bottom line is no one can take on all of that. You just can't. I think social media doesn't help at all. I think, the toxic nature that social media can be, and the belief that you can lash out at somebody that you don't know at all, or even if you do a little bit, make judgments about them and write them off as a person because they happen to have an opinion that differs from you, that's not demonstrating empathy. I think we are increasingly polarised, and we're polarised in the Christian world as well as in the secular world, and that I think we have lost the ability to engage in the shades of grey, and the world is not black and white. You know that, I know that. But we will also know people who seem to think it is black and white. And I'm very grateful that the world is, well, it's obviously full of colour, but there's also, in the colours there are minuscule shades, and it's those shades that I want to be living in. I want to live in the wrestling with the difference, and wrestling with your opinion and my opinion and someone else's, and trying to understand why you think that, and what makes you think that, and how might I learn from that, instead of deciding I know everything and you don't.
Penny is all about conversation, community, and sharing hope. She's done it her entire career. And now, as the chair of Christian Media and Arts Australia, she believes it more than ever. But she hasn't always been so passionate, especially about Christian radio. In fact, there was one moment which changed her view for good. She was on air when the 9/11 attacks happened in 2001.
Another one just hit the building. Wow. Another one hit it hard. Another one just hit the world face. The whole building just came apart.
What are those people going to do? All the elevators are blocked out.
So both towers are now.
I think that moment changed my belief in the power of Christian radio, because we were, Wes J, who's a very, very long-term Christian radio man, was producing for me, and he was getting interviews while we were going live the day after 9/11 with a whole range of different people. We could get people from America, and we were getting, archbishops and bishops. And I remember one of the archbishops was saying, "I just don't know what to say." And I said, "I don't think anyone knows what to say, but it'd be great if you could pray." Because what was it? What could you say? And what wisdom could we give? We were all totally shell-shocked by that event and the fact that the world had changed. That moment those aeroplanes went into those buildings, the world changed. But it also changed for me about the power of Christian radio, because I thought, the secular news was reporting on it. It was getting opinion pieces on it. It was doing all of that. But it doesn't know how to offer love, and it doesn't know how to offer hope in the midst of uncertainty and despair. And if that's one thing that Christian radio offers above all else, is that putting out the hand of care and compassion and empathy and love and all of those things that secular radio will never be able to do in the same way. And I thought to myself at that moment, if people can, even if they don't normally listen to Christian radio, but they know it's there, and there are days when they just are despairing, they know that they could switch on Christian radio and hear something that feeds their soul. And how powerful is that?
Penny, how, it's clear you're a passionate Christian, love God deeply. How have you lent on God, or what kind of role, apart from the obvious one, has God played, throughout your career?
I think what I learnt, I've only learnt it more recently really, is God has a hand in all that I do. And I know that we all think that. Maybe we do or don't all know that, because it's so unbelievable to even think that the God of the universe, who created every person in his image, literally cares about what I'm doing. I mean, we kind of are taught that, but you think, no, why would he care? I mean, there's 7 billion people on this earth at this moment in time. Why would he care? And yet when I look back on my career at various jobs or doors that have opened and doors that have closed, I think that's only because God has been moving in that space. And I, along the journey, didn't fully recognise his hand in that. And yet it is so extraordinarily, because I've never been very deliberate about my career. I'm not someone who has a plan. I'm going to do this for the next 5 years and then I'm going to go there and then I'm going to do there. I suppose particularly perhaps being a mother, that so much of your time is dealing with the parenting side, and parenting goes on for a long time. And so that becomes the prime, and the work. I mean, I never wanted to be a full-time mother, I should add. I'm not having a go at people who are or aren't. I just knew I needed to have both. I thought I would be a better mother if I had the challenges and interests that I could do as well as. And they were. I mean, the opportunity to do that kind of travel was mind-blowing, and it enriched my understanding of the world and hopefully enriched my children's lives. Along the journey in anybody's life, there's going to be really hard times, because that's the world that we live in. We're not promised an easy ride, and as Christians we should know that. It doesn't say that life's going to be easy. But I'd have to say, in terms of work, my working life has been ridiculously amazing. I've never had a job I haven't loved. I've been exposed to things and given opportunities, and that has just tested me and challenged me and blown me away and have been wonderful. I suspect the most challenges are in the messiness of life and the messiness of raising family and the messiness of getting old and those kind of things. From my perspective, all those other things I've got to do and the friendships that I have, and to me the most important thing is just walking alongside people, and that's what I love the most, having conversations, getting in a corner, finding out what makes people tick, praying together, loving people. To me that's what I get the most enjoyment out of.
Thank you so much to Penny Mulvey for sharing her story and passion for Christian media and sharing stories of hope and purpose. I hope one day to have such a legacy as you have had. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can send me an email, a review, or share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what someone can learn from another's journey. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I would love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. The purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. Proverbs 20, verse 5. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.